Hello! This is a video about Life is Strange 2, so I will be eagerly spoiling that game, and a bit of Life is Strange 1 as well. So, if you haven't already played these games, go play them or come to terms with getting significant scenes spoiled for you. I still think it's a great video to watch, regardless of whether you've played these games or not, because this isn't really about Life is Strange 2 itself. It's about the phenomenon of its release, of the reactions to the game, and also, especially, about the unique time in which it came out. But I hope you guys enjoy. On to the video. So, I'm currently in my senior year of college, the last semester before the last semester. And to mentally cope with the already begun grieving of leaving my closest friends on campus, I try to spend almost every available waking minute with them. Luckily, we're all gamers, so a lot of that time is spent gaming. Because there's only one out of us three that brought their television and full PlayStation system with them to their tiny dorm, I mostly just end up watching my friend play games. She buys what she wants, I watch what she wants to play. My poor Switch is lying in dust in some drawer of mine as of right now, sorry. Just last month, she decided to buy Life is Strange 2 on a whim. It was on sale for $5 damn for all the episodes, mind you. And I think that's an incredible deal, so I wish that were me. Regardless, I'm pretty excited to see her play through the game because I love watching people play games, and my last memory of Life is Strange 2 was when I had watched Jacksepticeye during my freshman year of high school. A pretty long time ago. For context, I had watched her play the first Life is Strange nearly a year ago, but not as intently as her playthrough of the sequel. And if there's one thing I found significantly different between watching her play the first game versus the second, it was this: her anxiety levels. She'd constantly go, "Fuck this game," or "I don't want to play anymore," with this nervous tone, and I'd almost always respond with, "It's just a game," to both soothe her and my own mind, because when someone else is anxious, I can practically feel it waving off them, and then it consequently starts influencing me, so for most of Life is Strange 2, we were just two anxious wrecks trying to figure out what would be the best version of Sean we could bring out through our decisions. Luckily for her, she was able to get one of the two more well-esteemed endings. Specifically the Parting Ways one. I can't decide whether I prefer that one or the Blood Brothers one, but that's not what the video is really about. When I had told her that she got one of the better endings, I remember her reaction. A mix of relief and a lot of sadness. Because Parting Ways is sad and undeniably bittersweet. There's no denying that, right? The brothers are separated, and God knows how much time it would take for them to be able to meet without any dire consequences. And before I forget to mention this, I remember her feeling another emotion during this whole process. Shock. Shock that this is one of the better endings. In a very quintessentially Life is Strange way, this game only had to offer very conflicting endings that wouldn't be entirely positively, emotionally fulfilling for anybody. The first game had done this, and in my opinion, the second one did it better. So, after completing Life is Strange 2, I went ahead and started doing whatever I tend to do after being done with a story I love. I googled a shit ton about it. I looked for fan art, background information on the game, behind the scenes stuff, anything that I could simply find about the other endings, because there was no fucking way I was gonna put myself through the emotional grinder again simply to see an ending where one of the brothers dies mid-ride while the alive 9-year-old one has to drive his dead brother and himself to Mexico with his unstable powers. I was simply not gonna do that. Now, I love to scour Reddit to see what people's thoughts about my favorite games are, which I think backfired for Life is Strange 2 specifically. It didn't even take 5 minutes to come across random, hateful, bitter comments regarding the political themes and racism explored in the game. I remember being hella into Life is Strange 1 and not having to read through nonsense comments like that, even though that game had its own fair share of woke, liberal, quote-unquote propaganda. And so, I started to get interested in something beyond Life is Strange 2's story. I crossed the diegetic outwards to the real-life factors keeping Life is Strange 2 afloat. and as I came to learn, very overshadowed at the same time. I remembered the game not getting the best reception in 2018 and 2019 because of the same reasons I had mentioned beforehand, but come on, it's 2025 now. Things have changed, and sure, if I try hard enough and wring my metaphorical hand through the deepest of my memories, I think I can safely claim that searching about Life is Strange 2 is 100% a far more peaceful experience now, what with there being a larger awareness of issues such as immigration and police brutality. But it's still bad, and I think I have answers for why. Why does it feel like the same dead horse is being beat over and over, again and again and again? Why is the game still dealing with the same complaints since 2018 and 2019? Why has it not had its blow-up moment, especially during times when it feels highly appropriate to bring this game back into the mainstream frame of discussion? I think it's safe to say that we as fans have our different explanations in regards to this. Discussing a video game's successes and failures within a vacuum can never really tell us the full answer to the question of whether it outshined its negatives or not. Mostly because the inherent qualities of a game do not fully determine why it got the reception it did, even though they still undeniably play a massive role. But in my experience, it can sometimes take years for a game to be shown the same amount of grace and open-mindedness as its competitors were given during the same release year. And I'm trying to argue that this was the exact case for Life is Strange 2. If it hasn't already become quite clear, I will not be trying to exposit too much about the Life is Strange games here, because I'd hope that most of you at least have a basic enough level of Life is Strange knowledge to be interested in what I have to say. But as a brief introduction/summarization, the first entry of the Life is Strange series was explosively popular when it came out, having found a massive community both through people's personal experiences of playing it and YouTube gaming videos. I mean, if you were watching creators like PewDiePie or Jacksepticeye like I was during the years of 2015 to 2019, there was no way you didn't either watch a Life is Strange playthrough or see it recommended on your front page. The game was a huge success because of the reactions it garnered from creators. However, that same love was not reserved for its sequel. In fact, it's safe to argue that it was mostly either ignored or received with mixed feelings, at least in comparison to the first Life is Strange. While there are logistical factors, like the wacky promotion and horribly loose release schedule to consider, this paper will explore other core reasons for Life is Strange 2's comparative failure. By paper, I mean I wrote this down, and now I'm going to talk about it. So, I want to talk about the drastic switch in the topics explored from the first entry within the Life is Strange series. I want to talk about the lack of a fulfilling power fantasy when playing as Sean, and the climate around gaming during Donald J. Trump's first presidency, from 2016 to 2020. I mean, I literally cannot ignore that final factor, considering the game predicates itself on mentioning it. So when combining all of these different qualities and the social context in which Life is Strange 2 was released, what we can see is an unintentional isolation of the game amongst a far smaller pool of players that showed a poor growth rate across chapter releases. And a poor growth rate now too. Now, as a quick overview, the first two entries of the game series are episodic and dabble in magical realism/fantasy/adventure. Both had 5 episodes that were released separately and across the span of several months. The central concept of the games is to make dialogue and action-related choices based on a branch of options provided to the player. In Life is Strange 2, people play as Sean Diaz, the Mexican-American teenage protagonist through whom players accompany the protagonist Daniel Diaz, Sean's little brother. The two brothers are traveling southwards from Seattle to Mexico after an encounter with a policeman that left their father killed, in response to which an agitated Daniel unintentionally triggers his telekinetic powers and kills the policeman. Consequently, the whole game's journey centers around their attempt to migrate from their home in order to escape punishment at the hands of the state. What becomes clear to Sean, especially, is that regardless of whether they would get legal retribution or not, things would never remain the same for them in general within the United States. The game also introduced each episode with this statement: "Your actions and decisions will have consequences and impact the world around you and your brother. Choose wisely." In terms of ratings, as of 2025, Metacritic shows a Metascore average of 85 for Life is Strange 1 and a 78 for Life is Strange 2, based on 23 and 18 critique reviews respectively. The user-based score shows a far more drastic difference, an 8.6 for the first game and a 6.8 for the latter. What is significant here is that 3,000 users rated Life is Strange 1, and only 1,000 bothered to rate Life is Strange 2. Clearly, even within a smaller range of players, there is a far less favorable perception of the second game, which is something that is not exclusively reflected in scores and reviews, so don't worry, I'm not going to be rambling statistics this whole video, but also in fandom discourse and the YouTube Let's Play community. My first argument will contextualize further upon why less people ended up ever getting into Life is Strange 2. And for this, we will have to look at the fandom disconnect / isolation, don't nod, the developers fostered within their fanbase. Life is Strange 1 was unique in that it starred a queer female protagonist, Max, in a popular game amongst a pool of mainstream AAA 2015 games. It is set in a fictional town that is based in Oregon, and the entire story takes place there. It's gorgeous, how can it not be, considering the abundance of pine trees that surround the school and the art direction of the studio, emphasizing the sweet, personal, sketchy feeling of Max's notebook. When considering the story, the game has a large cast of characters that repeatedly show up, all tied into the overarching murder mystery plot in one way or another, regardless of whether they're innocent or not. Each chapter had Max, Chloe, Warren, Victoria, Jefferson, Kate, and the mean cop dad, Nathan, etc. This had fans hooked, and there was a disappointment expressed every time a chapter had less of one or the other's presence in it, and a hope that the next chapter would have more of the other characters. The game also had this uniquely feminist and indie feeling to it that brought young queer and female gamers together, addressing a variety of issues spanning from the fetishization younger girls experience at the hands of older men, abusive relationship dynamics, and eventual murders of women as a result of such abuse continuing to bloom out. Simultaneously, Life is Strange 1 had classic story beats and a stereotypical high school dramatism that drew in other demographics. I feel like one thing that has a universal appeal is young adult beef, and we see that with Love Island every year. All kinds of people come to watch that show. So something important to note alongside all of this information is that the cast is, well, every major character is white, both culprits and the victims. Any and all non-white characters play minimal roles. The game worked very, very well in the favor of attracting the average white liberal player who understood the game's humorous references to internet spaces like Tumblr or certain gaming spaces on YouTube, which have really only gotten wider in their usage. More arguable for YouTube, of course, but Tumblr, there is no argument. You can go and check the statistics right now. In stark contrast, Life is Strange 2 features boys as the protagonists, both of whom are popularly perceived as Mexican / non-white, though they are technically half-white. And it does not stick to its initial setting within Seattle, but instead plays out as an unexpected road trip across 5 whole different states. It is a rocky, fast-paced game and allows no one but the brothers to act as big players in the story, lacking recurring characters. This extreme shift in genre led to many Life is Strange 1 fans being disappointed, and if you've seen the discussion, you've seen that specific complaint. The relatable quality also evaporated, as the narrative of victimhood shifted from the exploration of misogynistic abuse towards white girls to the adultification and discrimination facing brown-skinned Latina boys. Sean Diaz is a queer character, just like Max, but that factor was not enough to overcome the other boundaries set between the average Life is Strange 1 fan and the new game about police brutality and immigration. Don't Nod had strayed far away from the image of a white-centric cast set strictly within the boundaries of a cozy Pacific Northwest town. To confront that another similar-ish town in that region could be racistly violent is not the most welcoming nor business-friendly move to make. Another contrast to take into consideration is how much agency and literal power each protagonist holds. Life is Strange 1 involves a time travel mechanic in the form of Max's powers. It allows the player to rewind time and explore a diversity of action/dialogue related choices on the spot if they are disappointed with their initial decision. In Life is Strange 2, players cannot reverse any decision, since Sean does not have any powers, and the goal is to instead act as a companion to Daniel. Life is Strange 2's decision-making process is claimed to be far more anxiety-provoking than Life is Strange 1's because of this. Daniel is an emotional, impressionable 9-year-old that does not understand the full implications of what is happening to him or around him. And there is a general agreement that it's not easy to predict what choices would best impact the boy's conscience. In my opinion, the experience of playing as Sean can be similarly described to the feeling of riding the companion horse in one of my favorite games ever, Shadow of the Colossus. One of the lessons was that horses don't always obey. The player wouldn't be directly controlling the horse, but rather a man riding a horse. Taking this into the context of Life is Strange 2, people, and most definitely children, do not always quote-unquote obey either. The players do not have direct access to Daniel's telekinesis, and must hope that what they make Sean do will lead to Daniel acting desirably. And this is pretty vital, since Daniel tends to hold the final key to how many different scenes within the game progress. Whatever agency people may have expected from being the big brother in the scenario was reversed in this sense. On multiple instances, Daniel may or may not listen to Sean, depending on his moral development and brotherly attachment. Many cited this as being a frustrating experience as they felt that Daniel was too rebellious. While Sean has an obvious influence as Daniel's role model, and Daniel also just loves him in general, it's not spectacular enough to overcome the player's need for more control. Thus, there was a large-scale nostalgia for playing as Max, who almost always held the upper hand. In a very interesting case study of Resident Evil 5 I read about, I'll link it in the description below, it talks about how that game specifically others and isolates its non-white black characters. And within the paper, the author argues that the typical game narrative entails of quote-unquote white heroes that triumph through command of technology, end quote. It is possible to apply this case to Max's journey on a more generalizable level. There is a classic fantasy ingrained in the command given over her time travel skills that is not fulfilled in Sean's case because when you're playing as Sean, it simply feels like you're playing as another real-life human being, not as a powerful hero. Another concept that I found interesting and resonant is the rejection of a quote-unquote traditional journey of flow, end quote, that is found within the majority of video games. An idea that comes from a game design vocabulary, a book written by two game designers Naomi Clark and Anthropy. By a traditional flow, they are referring to the concept of games progressing from easier to harder levels/obstacles the longer a player, plays a game.
Why didn't you try to get help? Go to the police.
Oh, yeah. The police would help me after they shot my dad and accused us of murder. Great plan.
The two authors argued that it actually doesn't make any sense to create a traditional journey of flow for games that portray realistic life events. Their reasoning is that life simply doesn't work that way. Sometimes the hardest moments of a person's life is exclusively from their childhood, and things start getting better after that phase of life. So this is the important point. The authors claim that straying away from such a conventional narrative and game design opens the opportunity for players to consider external factors that may affect a game event or story event instead. I actually found this idea through an incredible paper written by Regina Mills. She talks about Life is Strange 2 and another Latino-centered video game within the context of player agency. I recommend giving it a read because it helped me get my own thoughts into organization. I'll be linking that as well. Now, back to the topic. Given that Life is Strange 2 aims to explore the complexities of brotherhood and racism, structures that are broader than Sean's individual self, Sean's impact being suppressed and or challenged by conflicts with Daniel and other characters within the game works in accordance with Clark and Anthropy's argument. When I thought about the climax of the game, in which Sean and Daniel are being blocked from the border by the police and their attorney, I noticed that I, as Sean, barely held any control over the situation, and this is exactly how my friend felt as well. In fact, the border police and Daniel's powers played just as much of a role in the outcome of the tense situation as our decision to either cross the border or surrender does. Sure, all the multiple endings truly depend upon the many choices we have made till this point of the game, but within the narrative of the game, it's clear that Dontnod is trying to tell us that our choices would be faced with reactions that can be so powerful that they can hinder our goals. We have to consider the roles of literally every other party within each scenario, because Sean simply doesn't hold that much power. Now, going back to Regina Mill's paper, she discusses how Life is Strange 2 quote-unquote refuses the player access to domination mechanics, but also provides other methods of empowerment for Link's minors, end quote. However, as I have already explained before, the presence of Latinx and non-white fans is honestly pretty underrepresented for Life is Strange 1. The dominant fanbase is white, and many who actually like the sequel admitted to not relating to the aspects of oppression faced by the brother, but they still managed to find sympathy. Which is sweet, and honestly, that should be the normal reaction. You see someone in pain or put in an unfair position, and the default response should end up being that you feel a need to help lighten their burden. But that really isn't how the world works, as we have seen. In contrast to these sympathetic fans, there was a large portion of the initial fanbase that came from the first game which felt like it had been put in an uncomfortable and unconventional protagonist role that was just not satisfying enough. Dontnod either knew this or didn't, but the truth of the matter is they took the risk and many of the players simply refused to keep playing as Sean for this exact reason. So that's it for my analysis of the Life is Strange 1 fanbase specifically and how it went into Life is Strange 2. But I think it's also important to talk about other people within this context as well. We have to discuss the YouTube gaming community, the gaming community in general, and the politics of these platforms and spaces, and how it really impacted the success of Life is Strange 2. Because, in comparison to other games, Life is Strange doesn't really have the most obsessive, dedicated fan base. Yes, the first game does have that, but at the same time, Dontnod has had to rely upon people outside of the obsessive fan base in order to garner more popularity. So, YouTube. I really hope everyone who was scouring the same YouTube as me during 2015 to 2018-ish understands what I mean when I say it was truly a cesspool back then. Like, it's not any better, but it was a time during which you could simply not avoid anti-SJW gets dunked on videos or other deranged, self-pleasuring, alt-right pipeline content. And I was like, what, 11 or 12 years old at that time? I really should not have been seeing all of that kind of content at such a tender and influential time of my life. But I bring all of this up because I genuinely believe that Life is Strange 2 was released at a time that inherently put the game in a disadvantaged position. I mean, it's weird, right? Because its prequel had gained so much attention through YouTube. So the same sort of trajectory to popularity was expected for the sequel as well. However, this did not end up being the case. Many of the popular gaming YouTubers who made up the highest viewed Life is Strange 1 playthroughs, PewDiePie, El Rubius OMG, and CoryX Kenshin, never ended up creating follow-up series on Life is Strange 2. Each of them garnered over 15 million views across their entire playthroughs of the prequel, so it only feels a little logical to follow up with the second game after achieving such success. And so, you wouldn't be surprised to know that the only exception to this pattern across the big YouTube gamers is Jacksepticeye, who has played both games and has the highest number of views for any Life is Strange playthrough that has been uploaded since. However, he had pretty controversial things to say regarding it, especially about the way the game addressed racism. He called it too vague, too explanatory, too in your face, not enough, and too headliney all at the same time. Believe me, you can go watch his reflection on the game right after completing it in his final episode of it. It is messy, and you can tell he's trying so hard not to show how certain moments bothered him because it just made his white self a little bit uncomfortable. We'll talk a little more about this in a bit.
But let's just take a small mandatory pause to address my choice to talk about Jacksepticeye. Please don't take this as any sort of hate. Unfortunately, his old self just made a very good example for my case study on the sort of YouTube behavior we all kind of hated back then, and I think he would agree with some of these criticisms, at least to an extent. I hope. I still watch that man and enjoy his videos. I'm not trying to cancel him. I don't even think I have that potential to. So just sit with me, listen and learn, and if you do disagree with my interpretations, do so respectfully in the comments.
And so looking back at all of this, I think we can confidently state that the avoidance of the game and also this mixed to negative reaction to the game affected the social perception of Life is Strange 2. Maybe I'm speaking partly out of bias, but this is most definitely to a partial extent, because of the culture surrounding how gaming YouTubers were treated during the 2010s. Because these creators reflected the conservative but paradoxically apolitical beliefs of gamers back then. I intend to view the influence of these gaming channels through the framework of micro-celebrity practices, as formulated by disinformation expert Becca Lewis. According to Lewis, micro-celebrities are average internet users who, quote, produce their own media and build influence amongst others, end quote. She goes on to say multiple individuals on YouTube have been able to build a legacy on rejecting progressive ideology. They frame such thought as being a mainstream agenda of some sorts. Now, by explicitly rejecting these so-called mainstream beliefs, many YouTubers have been able to produce a unique appeal, which some have further profited off by, quote-unquote, stressing their relatability and authenticity. Sorry, relatability, blah, blah, blah. Cannot pronounce today. But, in application of this concept to the aforementioned creators, it becomes clear that some creators use a specific kind of language and engage with very specific media to build an intimacy with their audiences. And would you know it, Life is Strange 2 was not gonna fit in their little boxes, their channel pages. It was just too much. It wasn't ironic enough, not humorous enough, a little too sincere, and obviously way too progressive. How dare you sympathize with immigrants during a notoriously anti-immigrant climate? Let's just not do that, I guess, was their logic? But more on YouTubers building a special intimacy with their audiences. PewDiePie, for example, would watch videos directly sent in by his fans. He would mock the people they wanted him to mock, and would act otherwise when that was desired instead. His very clever utilization of dark humor, making jokes about sensitive and controversial topics, appealed to millions of gamers and gave him a massive fan base that is honestly quite isolated from other online communities. I mean, you don't really see people talking about him much at all. I know a lot of people who have no clue that he's even the most subscribed YouTuber of all time. Like, it's fascinating really, but that's a topic for another time. What I want to emphasize is that his transgression of these social pleasantries worked in his favor to build solidarity with him amongst certain demographics, like young boys, white boys. You get the drift. Overall, the atmosphere of YouTube, especially during 2016 to 2019, was one that leaned towards being anti-SJW, meaning being against the criticism of racism and other bigotries, or more importantly, avidly downplaying those sentiments and saying that they're just not that serious, bro. And I was wondering if there was any term that would embody that specific movement, and found an incredible research paper on the situation by political scientist Alan Finlayson. In his paper on YouTube and political ideologies, he chooses to describe this chronically online flavor of anti-progressive behavior, a new form of quote-unquote right-wing populism, end quote. The explicit mention of misogyny in video games led to a mass harassment movement back in 2014 to 2015, Gamergate, the hateful effects of which remained strong in the coming years. Many creators feared discussing prejudice in gaming spaces, adopting an apathetic attitude in response to sincere discussions surrounding such issues. And with this context provided, it makes sense why certain people behaved the way they did back then, and still do now. I'm not going to go out and confirm how true that is for the sake of my mental, but I'm sure that this is still happening. But yeah, it was a time when you couldn't even really publicly condemn the usage of the N-word without having boys aged from preteen to 30 giving you complete shit for it in your comments, because how could you betray your best friend by telling him he's wrong for saying that as a white man? The sin of it all. In one scene of Jack's Life is Strange 2 series, a white man has Sean kidnapped in the back of a gas station store and tells the poor boy that he is the reason they should build that wall. And Jack responds,
"You hold tight. I'm gonna go get your brother."
Okay, now I get it. So it's a racial thing against Mexicans. I get it. Subtle game. Fuck's sake.
In the second episode of his playthrough, he constantly makes jokes about the brother's father being dead. And there are multiple comments under the video that bond over his sense of humor, adding on to the dead dad joke. By the end of his playthrough, he speaks of the game pushing a specific agenda by only showing events of racism that he has already seen in headlines, while simultaneously not digging deeper. What is evident in his reactions to the game is a lack of interest and desire to deeply feel the tragedy and reality that is portrayed within the story. He constantly tries to insert breather moments in order to diverge the conversation from subjects of police brutality or racism, which is a natural tendency for people within any kind of heavily emotional situation. But is that truly the correct way to be acting? Especially when you know that you're recording a game about such a topic? Anyways, he also alludes to an agenda being spread using the kind of anti-mainstream language that Lewis was describing, and that right-wing populist tone as Finlayson was calling it. When you go to his comment section now, there is a lot of criticism of the way he talked about the game, but it's mostly from recent years. And I think personally, Jack would 100% go back to this playthrough and understand why a lot of the shit that he said comes off as ignorant, or why his immediate responses to certain moments in the game are just uncomfortable to witness. But anyways, let's move on from talking about one specific person. That was very uncomfortable for me to do, but don't lie, that was compelling to think through, right? But let's move on. Let's go a little broader with our focus. Let's talk about Steam. Steam is one of the biggest gaming community sites with public forums for people to share their general thoughts. Now, I personally never really used it to scour for any one such opinion or another. I'm only gonna go there to buy games, that's what most people do. But my experiences cannot dictate the value the forums there hold regardless. One specific thread there, with 77 overall comments, created in 2021, is titled, "Life is Strange 2 is a masterpiece that is tarnished by forced political bias." The creator of the thread argues that multiple aspects of the game were great, but the quote-unquote forced political agenda is beyond annoying, end quote. As with most controversial forum threads, multiple people got into arguments under it, but the weight of those who agreed with the original user overshadowed any dissenters. One user says the racists are depicted as glorified plot devices that are comically one-dimensional. Another called the game a clumsy attempt to virtue signal. Now, let's think about this. A significant pattern in this thread was people agreeing that racism is bad, but thinking that simply showing racism and explicitly disagreeing with it in-game comes off as preachy or extreme. So, when I was reading these comments, And I tried to view these comments against the argument in Finlayson's paper. I found it easy to see how these users are engaging in a form of what he calls paradiastole, the act of reframing a thing from one moral evaluative category to another. Also, I'm pretty sure that paradiastole is a concept that it's like general, like I just never heard about it before this paper, so I'm gonna kind of give credit to it. Anyways, going back to that concept, it talks about reframing something and how do these users do it. What they try to do is they redefine the depiction of explicit anti-Mexican racism and police brutality as being a part of an agenda. Honestly, with the way they describe it, it seems like they're heavily implying that they find don't nods, narrative choices, selfish and acquisitive by this virtue. This is and was extremely common rhetoric to use online during the time of Life is Strange 2's initial release. There's even a thread from 2018 in which a user argues that the game pushes anti-white stereotypes, and this resonates really strongly with Finlayson's argument of right-wing populists' tendencies to call the allegation of racism itself racist. You can't ever win in this discussion, it seems. And honestly, I think I'm gonna start straying away from talking about this because there's a lot of evidence I can find online, but I also think that if you know enough about the game and you've engaged with the community, you've seen and heard enough yourself. I just wanted to bring a fresh perspective to how we can analyze or understand where these people are coming from and why they seem to get so defensive and angry over Life is Strange 2. Now, I wanted to talk about some potential counter-arguments to this argument that I'm trying to make. We can say that there was not much of a fundamental disconnect between audiences and Life is Strange 2 for its political content to be a big reason for its failure within the series. A large part of the fandom continues to blame the logistical factors that slowed the game during its release process, with it receiving a lot of criticism for its multiple delays in between chapter releases. The first episode was released in September 2018, and the fifth and final one was released in December 2019? It took over a year for the entire story to come out, and reflecting back on that, I just think it's crazy. In contrast, Life is Strange 1 had a consistent 1 to 2 month gap between each of its 5 episodes and had the whole game published within 10 months, so the pacing was a lot tighter. The choppy pacing for the sequel led to loads of people choosing to come to the game in later years or choosing to fully drop it. And while I understand these criticisms and that frustration, I think that it's also clear that Life is Strange 2 acted as a repellent simply due to the sensitive topics that it was addressing. Before anyone knew that the full release schedule of the game would be so inconsistent, many big content creators who chose to commit to Life is Strange 1 and enjoyed that game did not even bother touching the first episode of Life is Strange 2. And many games get a promotional advantage through being showcased across different popular YouTube channels, which was not the case for Life is Strange 2, as most YouTubers realized that it wouldn't be profitable nor comfortable to sit with the game's content. To kind of wrap this argument up, multiple people online were already showing extreme upset in response to the police brutality that was showcased in the first episode in 2018, before even the second episode had come out. It was so inflammatory that it makes sense that people who wouldn't like those topics would immediately drop it after that. The disconnect amongst the original game's fanbase and also the general populace of gamers and YouTubers happened foundationally because Life is Strange 2 chose to discuss issues of immigration and anti-Mexican racism during an era of Trumpism and post-Gamergate YouTube. Like, good God, reflecting back on all of this and having done my research, seeing that there are whole scholarly terms now many years old that were created specifically to address this toxic conservative behavior amongst gamers online just makes me feel that much more protective of Life is Strange 2. I can't see from any angle how releasing this game during that time wasn't deliberate self-sacrifice. Like, Don't Nod chose to make the black sheep of the video gaming industry, and for what? I guess they got comfortable with the first game's money, and they were like, yeah, let's go ahead and upset everybody now. I'm not making fun of them, I'm actually saying that this is kind of admirable. But it's also probable that because they're not American, they are a French studio, they assumed that Americans would be more sympathetic on a broader level to the issues addressed in this game, especially because it was so timely. But maybe there was a disconnect over that and misunderstanding? I don't know. I haven't done enough research on that specific area, but overall, like just from an objective lens, you can see that they took a big risk and the payoff wasn't the greatest. Hopefully, you know, over the years, over the decades, probably, we'll see a little more admiration for the game. I know that there are other things holding it back, just like the general perception of Life is Strange games being a little cringe, a little millennial, a little too Tumblr-y, which I also understand, and I think that was not the greatest way to portray specifically the adventure of Sean and Daniel. But I still think overall it was an incredible game, and it's a gem, and we should be coming back to it again and again and again. And we should try to understand why it failed comparatively to the first game back then, and why it seems to not really get the love that I think it still deserves now. So that's for the video. If you have any important context that you'd like to provide or information that you'd find interesting that's relevant to this topic, do let me know, because I actually like being disproven, or being told that, you know, that I could have added a little more here and there, which that's not harmful at all. It's always great to have a little more to my argument, my understanding of this topic. Let me know how you thought this video was. Have a great day!